All right, welcome into the very first episode, the world premiere of the Intergenerational album project, brought to you today by myself, Duncan Simmons, and my father, Robert Simmons. Dad, why don't you just explain from your own words, this is your idea, what the point of this whole thing is, listening to these albums?
Yeah, thanks. When I was in my sort of prime music listening time, call it from when I was like 12 years old till I was 25 years old, there were still LPs, there was still vinyl. That was sort of the dominant way that you would actually buy songs. And I've noticed over the last 15 or 20 years that we've drifted away from albums as the primary source of our music, and we're buying or we're consuming music on Spotify and those kind of streaming services, and we've gotten away from albums as the way we listen to music.
Mm-hmm.
And I think albums used to be produced as they were intended to be listened to as albums. And so what I thought would be cool is if we picked some albums and you and I independently sat down and listened to them as albums and gave our thoughts on the body of work instead of just on some great songs that may happen to be on that album. So that was
Yeah.
kind of the genesis of this, and maybe we'll do a Genesis album at some time, but that was the idea behind this whole thing.
Yeah, no, it's fairly simple, straightforward as far as the concept goes, but I think it's spot on. Yeah, Spotify and Apple Music have kind of pushed us towards the singles. I totally agree with you there. Yeah, so I'm excited to do this. And let's just go ahead with our first album, shall we?
We shall.
All right, so first album this week, and we're going to take turns picking albums for the show, but for me this week, it's my pick, and I have picked Teddy by Teddy Pendergrass from 1979. It's 12 songs, totaling 55 minutes, 35 seconds. Why don't we just start off like this? Does it meet our criteria for the project? Did you like it as a collection of songs or as a total album?
I liked it, but I had to listen to it twice to get to that
Hmm.
liking it stage. When I listened to it the first time, I was really surprised, first of all, that you would pick this. I mean, you're a young guy, and this is from my kind of prime time of listening to albums. I've never heard this one before,
Interesting.
and I don't remember any of the singles off of this either. I was 15 when this came out,
Mm-hmm.
and I just fundamentally don't remember. I remember Teddy Pendergrass, but I don't remember anything from this. So I went into it cold, and it was the first time through. It felt like a bunch of songs pasted together to me. To be honest, it felt like sort of um, soul or pop soul from that era, and nothing super special, to be honest. But then I
Mm-hmm.
sat down and listened to it the second time, and I loved the songs the second time a lot better than I did the first time through. And I really felt like it did behave like an album on the second listening. It's got great pacing. It's telling a story. They're kind of thematically connected, and to me, it lives as an album, and I rather liked it.
Yeah, I would agree with you, but more on your first listen through thoughts. I really like this album. I'm a big fan of Teddy Pendergrass and kind of this 70s soul sound. Guys like Marvin Gaye and things like that. Big fan of the sound, but I would agree with your point that it's not really fit together as an album. It has a super cohesive sound, which I really like, and we'll get to later. But just some of the themes of the songs are kind of all over the place. You got some that are falling in love, some that are kind of breakup ballads, some that are, you know, they're all kind of over the place thematically. So I don't think it works super well as a total album for me, but I do love just about every single song on here as its own thing.
Interesting, because I saw it thematically being stitched together better than you did.
Huh,
I heard all of the things you heard, but I kind of saw it as weaving away through relationships, right?
right.
Starting with the song that you're playing in the background now. It's a very sort of intimate song,
Hmm.
and And at points I thought, this is not even suitable for work thematically kind
Right.
of stuff, subject matter. and but I did hear it as an album that went through all of that. And even later on in the album, where it punches up a little bit and gets
Yep.
away from Marvin Gaye and more into James Brown, I
Hmm.
still thought it was kind of about that relationships and just the energy in relationships as well. So yeah, I hear you. Um, but I ended up landing on, it was a pretty good bunch of songs on a pretty good album.
Right. Yeah, and I'm being kind of nitpicky with it. It does really everything is encompassed in that relationships kind of theme. But yeah, I just felt like it could have been arranged a little better to kind of fit that theme. The thing I do like that you mentioned is it does start slow, and by the time you get to song 8, it's ramped all the way up, and there's a really clear ramping up of that tempo and feel of each song. So I did like it cohesively like that.
And I really think that's an important part that's sometimes missed in albums. You know, it's like a good movie. You can't have that breakneck pacing
Right.
and tension all the time. That's why, you know, in a horror movie, sometimes it's just a cat because it gives you a little break from the fear of the monster, and then the monster comes back. But in this album, you know, I think that pacing is pretty well done. It's almost a straight line ramping up to the most high energy songs at the end, but you know, it does have some breathing in it, which I liked as well. So, you know, I think that's
Yeah.
something we'll see with this project. I hope that, you know, really great albums are not just stitched together thematically, but they also sort of breathe a little bit as they build and use up energy.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think sometimes albums get bogged down into being all the way slow or all the way breakneck speed, like you mentioned. And it's kind of nice that this one has a very clear flow from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Agreed.
All right, let's move on to our next question. The big question: does it hold up? This being a 1979 released, 41 years old now at this point. Does it hold up to you?
You know, there's every chance that I'm stuck in 1979, but but I thought it did. I thought, you know, it's got some production values that I think are terrific. And while not contemporary, I think are more or less timeless. You know, you hear a lot of
Hmm.
sort of a lot of slap bass in this. You hear some horns. You know, you've got kind of your classic, almost Motown background singers, um, and and I just think it does hold up. And mostly it holds up because Pendergrass holds up. That
Right.
guy, he can sing,
Yeah.
and that just doesn't go away.
Yeah, that's something I had written down for this too. Is that this album is really carried by Teddy Pendergrass's vocals. His voice is one of a kind, even in a category that's Marvin Gaye, James Brown, guys that we mentioned a little bit before, that are all these massive, room filling type voices that are really just beautiful voices. I think Teddy, even in that group, really stands out, and this whole album is really carried by that.
You know, I'd agree with you on that. I wasn't expecting this to live up to, you know, the Marvin Gaye banner, if he's our gold standard for this kind
Sure.
of music, and I think he is.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised and impressed how well Teddy Pendergrass holds up against that blue chip standard.
Yeah, totally agreed. And then the other thing I had written down for this is 1979. So right before the 80s hit, and we get all this experimentation with electronic instruments and stuff like that. That's where I think a lot of music kind of becomes outdated. Is you try something weird and it's cool for the time, but then 40 years later, it just sounds totally out of place.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, all the instruments in this, it's that big brass sound, very cleanly recorded, and you get the instruments as they're played, basically, I would think. And that sound to me just never goes out of style. So I'd agree with you there.
You know, it's interesting because Teddy Pendergrass was in a group prior to going out on his own, and you know, reasonably successful group, and I can't remember the name of it now, of course. But
Right.
I thought, geez, you know, that's kind of the same arc as Lionel Richie when Lionel Richie left the Commodores.
Hmm.
So I actually looked it up, and Lionel Richie left the Commodores in, I think, 1982, and Teddy left his group in 1977 or something, 78. And when you stack this up against Lionel Richie's music, which you're probably not all that familiar with,
No, not very.
you know, Lionel Richie just doesn't stack up. He
Mm,
doesn't have the voice, and I think the arrangements are more poppy and maybe more or less enduring because of that. Where, as you say, this has got a real timeless quality to it that you get out of kind of a Marvin Gaye or a Barry White, which we
mm,
haven't talked about yet. Where Lionel Richie, bigger selling artist, but is he a more enduring artist? I would say no.
right. Yeah, and even just someone like, even as a bigger example, someone like Michael Jackson, who is obviously a timeless artist, but he has a couple songs where you get some of those weird 80s things and it just doesn't quite sound right for
Yeah, when he
today's
tries
music.
to do salsa on "You Want to Be Starting Something," it
Yeah.
just doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, but as far as standing up, I think this album is excellent. It's very, very listenable today.
I
Um,
completely agree.
yeah, yeah. All right, let's move on to our next thing. What were the songs that stood out to you? This is either for good reasons or for bad reasons. Let's hear what you liked or didn't like specifically on the album, and maybe we can play a couple of those things.
Sure. I'll start with one that I really liked a lot. It's "If You Know Like I Know."
Yes, I had that down on my list, and we'll start
Nice.
that right now.
And it punches like a light heavyweight.
Oh
It's
yeah,
got some really awesome, funky bass in it.
yeah.
And I think he just, he's roaring when he whispers on this one. It's awesome. This is a great song.
Yeah. To me, this is where we talked about the progression of the album before, and this is where it kind of flips around into being the more high energy type songs. And it kind of caught me off guard when I was listening to it, because you mentioned it, that slap bass that comes in right at the beginning that you can probably hear right now, goes on throughout the song, and it gives it a really cool, funky feel, I guess. I'm a big fan of this one.
Yeah, he's peeling the top off funk in this one for sure.
Yeah.
Like he's not he's not messing around with this one. And again, his vocals, man,
Yeah.
he's got a pretty serious phrasing and power and just liquid voice that I really like.
The note I made down beside this one was just vocal range. This is if you need an example of what we talked about earlier, his voice carrying this album, this is the exemplifier, because the bass and the instruments in the background are great, and the background singers, but like we mentioned, those are kind of elements you can find in a lot of songs, and this is the perfect example of Teddy Pendergrass's voice taking a song to that next step up.
It's an outlier on the album because it's not a love song, and
Right.
its tempo is all different. But it would be the song I would point to as the Teddy Pendergrass song I'll take away from this album.
Yeah, I love this one, but as far as a favorite, I would probably have to go with "Set Me Free," the second to last album on this song, which I'll start playing right now. Song number 7. This was probably my favorite. Starts a little slow, but really picks up.
So this one I liked as well, and that opening few bars is a very familiar treatment, and not a ripoff, but of quite a few songs from that time that were more schmaltzy adult pop for me. So I think I
Mm,
got turned off right away by the opening
right.
bars, and I think it was triggering some bad memories of that time for me musically. So it probably never stood a chance with me. But tell me why you liked it.
Yeah. Interesting. Why do I like it? Yeah, it's kind of hard to put a finger on this one, but like we talked about, again, the way this album ramps up, and here we kind of get a little bit of a lull, and some really nice instrumentation in the first minute or so of this song that you can hear right now, and then it just kind of pops right here, right as I'm speaking, actually, um, into another great high energy Teddy Pendergrass vocal explosion. I just love the way it picks up seamlessly, from into, it kind of starts as one thing and becomes another.
This one, just as it kicks up there, that you made a note of, Dunk, it reminds me of a lot of 70s TV shows.
Oh yeah, good one.
Yeah, I would say Magnum PI, maybe
Yeah.
Starsky and Hutch, like a lot of those sort of cop weekly dramas from the 70s, Mannix even maybe. They kind of use that jazzy, brassy sound, and it really sounded to me like TV from the 70s, which I liked.
Yeah, that's a great pull from that. Yeah, I didn't really think of it, but that's exactly right. It does kind of have the classic guitar, slap bass again kind of sound, which I'm a huge fan of.
Big time. Yeah, I don't begrudge you your pick. It's a good pick. I just got triggered by the opening chords. and I figured out what song it was while we were talking. It's a song called You Make Me Feel Brand New by the Stylistics.
Okay.
It's a 1974 song. If you get a chance, give it a listen, and you'll see what I mean by the opening few bars of each song.
Interesting. So let's go with that. Things you didn't like. Can you tell me a song or two that you weren't a fan of?
It was a pretty clean album that way.
Yeah.
I'm used to sort of having a stinker on an album for sure, a song I just fundamentally don't like. And I had trouble finding one that, really kind of, I don't care if I ever listen to again. I think they're all very
Yeah.
listenable. Turn Off the Lights, which is one of the more sort of not graphic, because by today's standards, it's very PG rated,
Yeah.
but it just seems so on the nose for that era to me.
This is so funny because I have the
a line that
exact
says,
thing
"Pour some
written
hot
down.
oil over me"?
What's that?
There's a line in here somewhere that's like, "Pour hot oil on me."
Oh yeah.
Yeah. It's just going, hey, come on, Teddy. Like, some things are meant to be private.
Yeah, that's so funny. I had the exact same thing written down. Turn Off the Lights and Do Me, which is another on the nose song title. I just had it written down as a little too sexy.
Yeah.
It's just it's a little uncomfortable, especially Turn Off the Lights. It's just if you really pay attention to the lyrics, it's a great song if you're doing your laundry and you're not listening too close, but if you're really listening to those lyrics, it gets a little uncomfortable for my taste.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because maybe it's just our upbringings being a little too starchy, but
Yeah.
it seemed a little too intimate for me as well. Good songs, they're
Oh, yeah.
well put together, but yeah, the lyrics, and it's so funny hearing this. The 70s, of course, were an era of great liberation, sexual liberation and
Right.
freedoms and all that stuff, and so clearly this is a reflection of that. And comparing it to contemporary hip hop, it's not even close to how explicit it is. But I'd rather listen to some Biggie Smalls and than this song in terms of being uncomfortable.
Right. Yeah. It just gets a little too much into the details.
Yes.
So
it stops just short of biology, but not much.
I think that's another thing that's kind of characteristic of this era of Motown and soul music is these artists know to go right up to the line, give it a nudge, and pull back just at the right time, to where you're not going overboard. Turn Off the Lights maybe goes a little over the line, but again, like you said, that it might be subjective to us.
I think the line got blurred for him on that one.
Yeah. Fair enough. Was that your only other one that stood out as bad? I totally agree with you. I think as far as highs and lows, this is an album that kind of rides the average, its own average pretty well. It's very clean to listen to, and if it was going through and listening to it again, I don't think there would be any skips.
Me too.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things about an album, when you actually played it on a record player, was you just didn't want to get off the couch to skip through a song. It had to be a pretty crappy song to do that. And this one, this one passes that test handsomely.
Yeah.
Stay on the couch for this one, because it's a good ride all the way through.
Yeah, well said. Illa, if you got no other songs that stood out to you, we'll move on. Can you hear influences in this album? I'm not going to be able to do this very well. You mentioned earlier that you're more of this time, so you might be able to pick this out. I can only say kind of what we said already, just the Motown soul sound. This is kind of towards the end of the era, as I kind of understand it. of the peak of Motown. But you can definitely hear, like you said, the brass sound, the backup vocals, the slap bass is all very characteristic of its time, and I think this album is a perfect relic of its era.
Agreed. And you nailed it, Duncan. When you talk about the Motown sound, what comes to my mind first of all is the Phil Spector Wall of Sound.
Right.
And Phil Spector just died like a couple
Yeah,
of
that's
days
right.
ago.
Just a few days ago.
And so that was Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, and Diana Ross and the Supremes, and that kind of era of Motown, the Four Tops, the Spinners, which we should do an album
Yes.
from as well. And this is kind of the second chapter of Motown, which was more 70s urban contemporary soul, I would call it. And what I heard a lot of in here is the same things you heard. A lot of Marvin Gaye, and favorably compared to Marvin Gaye, I heard a lot of Barry White in here as well. And I don't know if you've listened to a lot of Barry White, but for a while he was almost a caricature of that smooth urban soul lover singer guy. But man, he can friggin' sing too. And I heard a lot of Barry White in here. And I heard a lot of James Brown as the album progressed. I heard a lot of that barky, snarly kind of James Brown, or almost vocal assault kind of stuff, but done with a ton of talent. So it was never really shouting. I heard those three in here, and they were the ones that occurred to me.
Yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page. I would, as far as unique sound, I could only really point to Teddy's voice, like you said. But again, that's also kind of characteristic of this time.
Yeah, and the production itself and the arrangements, and I bet there was session players on this album that played on 50 other albums we've heard. And so while it's great, it's not unique. And what makes it unique is Teddy Pendergrass.
Absolutely, totally agreed.
Nice.
So with all that being said, who would you recommend this to? Is there a specific audience you have in mind, a specific demographic?
Yeah, I had trouble with this, pal, because I don't know that I would point anyone specifically at it, but I would never point anyone away from it either. There isn't any particular group that I would say, you really need to give this a listen if you want to kind of understand the era and just listen to some great music. I would say that in terms of situations, I think it's got its place both, kind of doing the laundry. Like it's pretty good background music while you're puttering around. And I think it'd be awesome music just for a quiet night at home, after dinner's done and you don't feel like watching Netflix. Like, this is just kind of good atmospheric music that, if you're paying attention to it, you'll get something out of it. And if you're not, you'll get something out of it.
Yeah, totally agree. I think this is perfect background music. That's kind of what I had written down. I think this album works really well just to have on while you're doing other things. It's not one, like you said, that moves around a whole bunch as far as tempo and tone. So you kind of just set it and forget it. Like you said, just stay on the couch and listen all the way through. The only other group I had written down was couples trying to get pregnant. That was my only hard recommendation.
It's probably got those qualities as well. I wonder how many babies are named Teddy in the world because of this.
Right. Yeah, that's not a hard recommendation, but just one the only one I could think of as far as a specific group of people.
It's a fair one.
Yeah.
Nice. We agreed too much on this one.
Yeah, that's funny how that worked. I wasn't sure you'd pick up on all that stuff, like the turn off the lights, but that's perfect.
Were you expecting me to enjoy it?
Yeah, I was. I kind of know that you at least appreciate this era and sound of music, so I knew you wouldn't dislike it. I wasn't sure to what degree you would like it, or if you'd love everything on it, but it sounds like you did, and I'm happy that you did.
I did. I totally did. I was, as I said, kind of blown away that you picked it. And the other cool part of it was, as I said off the top, was I'd never listened to it before. And
yeah.
I don't I didn't recognize any of the singles from it, even though they had some success. And so I really appreciated that look at a chapter that I hadn't experienced
Hmm.
back in real time.
Yeah, this was one that I just kind of heard a couple songs off of. Um, Never really dove too hard into Teddy Pendergrass, but I have a rotation on Spotify of kind of Motown artists, and he's come up before, and yeah, I had a good time listening all the way through this
It
album.
was a solid choice to kick this thing off.
Right
Nicely
on.
done.
Good. 1 for 1. So what's up for next week? It's your turn. At the head of this, you got to assign our next album. What's up?
A lot of pressure on this.
Yes.
And I was super torn because there's so many albums that are from the 70s and 80s that I listened to a ton when I was a kid. And I was tempted to go back to one of those, like a Led Zepp 4 or a Rush 2112, or even a Boston's eponymous, debut album, ones that I wore out listening to. But I decided to go for something that an artist I like, but an album I hadn't listened to. And so next week, we're going to take a look at David Bowie and his 1974 album, Diamond Dogs.
Nice. Keeping it in the 70s.
You're going to have a hard time getting me out of the 70s, pal.
Don't worry, I'll throw something in for next week.
Okay.
But that's getting ahead of ourselves. David Bowie, Diamond Dogs. I'm looking forward to it. Like I said to you off air, I have obviously heard David Bowie because he's just one of those artists you can't go through life without hearing. But I can't say that I've ever really sat down and played a song of his. So I'm really looking forward to it. Obviously, there's a lot of love out there for David Bowie, so can't be that bad.
Don't speak too soon. Hey, this was fun. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, this was great. And like we said, we'll be back next week with another one of these. I'm already excited for it.
Terrific.
Right
Take
on.
care.
Yeah, thanks, Dad.
Love you.
Love you too.
Bye.